Welcome everyone. My name is Nirmal Kishnani. I'm an associate professor at this Department of Architecture at the College of Design and Engineering, National University of Singapore. I will be moderating today's session with guest speakers Florian Heinzelmann and Daliana Suryawinata, who are co-founding directors of SHAU. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with SHAU, a very brief introduction. They are an award-winning practice founded with Tobias Hofmann in Germany. But I think the pivot point was when you guys moved to Bandung in 2012 and began to seriously explore the idea of tropicality. Now, I'm old enough to remember tropicality when it was first trendy. And I think it's been very interesting to see the journey of this idea over the last 40, 50 years from something that was a kind of a clash of ideas, post-colonial identity meets energy efficiency, and that kind of faded away, sadly. I think with the birth of the green design movement, everything was pinned down to numbers. So we kind of lost the intuitive in the performative. And the performative became all about metrics, but we kind of lost touch with what that meant to architecture. So I'm very happy because SHAU is one of those firms that is leading this conversation on how we bring the performative back with placemaking to rediscover not just lux levels, but also human interaction with space. And I think that, at least from my point of view, goes to the core of the conversation that we're trying to have on sustainability. So I'm not going to take too long, and I'm going to hand over to Daliana and Florian.
Thank you very much, Nirmal, for the introduction. So, let's start. Between Capricorn and Cancer is the lecture today. And of course, we are not necessarily talking here about star signs, because, I mean, Daliana and I, we were not born during that time of the year. But yeah, so it's about the winter solstice and the summer solstice in a way in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, where you have the longest daylight. It is also a little bit, in a way, this opposition or these two polarities, what was Nirmal already earlier mentioning about the quantity and the qualities, that we try to bring and bridge this together. We have here a map. This is our very personal Dymaxion map. So we used to show always the Mercer map, but what we like about this, you can cut it in pieces and can rearrange the triangles, as long as, of course, geographically everything is hanging together. But we try to do it in such a way to show you a little bit where we are coming from. So, and also hanging together the whole equatorial region, because you see in the north we have the Tropic of Cancer, and the south the Tropic of Capricorn, and this is this belt specifically around Singapore and Indonesia, what we're dealing with. And it's a very specific climatic zone, it's tropical rainforest, and in a way it is rather different from where we're coming from, where we were trained partly in the Netherlands, partly in Germany. So it is a journey for us to come back here. It's a journey of learning, unlearning, and relearning, especially about how people are interacting within this climate. And probably you're familiar, so this is the sun path on different parts of the planet, but it's a little bit of an abstract diagram. Therefore, I run you shortly through what it means, because you probably might have also a northern context. So what we are used to, this is Germany, Munich, where I was born. So you see this several parts. It's very significant. We always have sunlight from the south in a very shallow angle in December, and of course the longest day, 21st of June. But you also see that throughout the year we have very short sunlight hours in the winter and very long ones in the summer, and a relatively long twilight zone. So we are used in Europe that, you know, sun is setting, it takes a couple of hours till the sun is completely gone or appearing. But the more south you go, the more it sort of equals out the sun hours, and the shorter this twilight zone is due to the angle of the planet towards the sun, the obliqueness. And of course, when you come to Singapore, or for that sake an equatorial region, then the whole bandwidth circled upwards vertically, and you have now 21st of June and 21st December, you have sun from the south and sun from the north. And this is entirely a different premise how you have to design architecture for that, because you have to take both sides into consideration and not only the southern side. And of course the sun is also setting relatively fast. And just for the sake of interest, you see then here, if you would go to the North Pole, then of course we have parts of the year where there is complete darkness or complete sunlight, and we have only a seasonal twilight. But how do we deal with the sun as a component here in the tropics? So if you look at this diagram very shortly, sun has a direct component, and through aerosols or clouds we have a diffuse component. And that changes drastically the quality of the light as well, because that's what we want to deal with ultimately as architects. And showing a bit more this diagram, so you see a comparison between Singapore and Cairo. So you have in comparison to each other, so on the left side, the direct component in the tropics is in terms of lux levels, in terms of illumination, much lower than you have the direct component on the right side. But then in terms of diffuse component, it completely flips over. So that means, like, if you plan for openings and shading devices, there's a different approach between these components. But what and how do we make use of this as architects? So in terms of daylighting, you can imagine you have transmission and you have reflection of daylight. And this is always an interplay between geometry and between material properties, not only in color, but also in the way how light is reflected. So if you have a mirror, you have a specular reflection. If you have like a rough surface, you have a spread reflection. It goes generally in this direction, but it is sort of spreading out, scattered. And you have a diffuse reflection if you have a very matte surface. So you have the same thing, of course, with transmission as well. So in a part of this lecture, these works we are going to show you are employing these strategies as sort of a underlying principle. But daylight, of course, is very important, not only for well-being, not only for activities and activities, but of course, if you can employ daylight, you can reduce energy consumption for artificial lighting, but especially in hot regions, as we know here as well, you have to be careful how much you let in. So you have to be very selective, because otherwise you ramp up your energy bill again via cooling. And probably all of you have counted this. This is a nice slide from Nirmal, which I stole a while ago. He doesn't know, so therefore he's like smiling. But so, yeah, we have certain minimum requirements about light which we want to have in. But that's not the only part of our work which we do. So it's not only about the quantities, but it's also about the qualities and how and what atmospheres we are generating. But in the end of the day, it always should be a very useful space for a certain task at hand.
So practicing in the Lucky Belt, so to say, mostly in the equator of Indonesia, but sometimes also projects in Berlin, all the way to Nusantara, the new capital. So there is a range of locations that we do, but also the range of scales. So for us, there is no project too small, but there is no project too big either. We're going to highlight some of these work that we are doing at the moment. But let's start on these daylight strategies with houses on stilts. So these are exemplified by SHAU's projects, microlibraries, and cultural buildings. And we are going to talk about these three projects, two microlibraries, Microlibrary Bima, Microlibrary Warakayu, and on the right side is also a typology of house on stilts, but it's a bigger building, so to say. It's not a microlibrary, it's a cultural center in Tasikmalaya. So let me start with the microlibrary and the intention of bringing a reading facility as interesting architectural playfulness and community spaces all at once to Indonesia. So there is an issue with reading interest, and it is really still important to increase that reading levels worldwide anyway. And microlibraries we think is the kind of right scale, under 200 meters square. Within the neighborhood, it is embedded. It's like the facility that comes to the neighborhood instead of people having to go to the central library, which is in a way still very important. but it sits in between these two scales. And for us, the stakeholder engagement is key in kind of the mechanization of this whole microlibraries. So SHAU acts in this case as initiator, but also organizer, researcher, and designer, while we gather the communities, the users, together with the funding partner, and usually the land is provided by government and the media for publicity, so that there is a win-win situation also for the funding partners and some NGOs who help the support. In this case, a lot of it comes from Indonesian Diaspora Network. So far, this is the overview of microlibraries that we have done and are doing. And so far, 7 are built at the moment, all in Indonesia. And let me start with microlibrary Bima, which is in Bandung. This is the first microlibrary built in 2015. And Dompet Duafa is Pocket for the Poor, a Muslim charity organization, funded the building. So it is basically a volume over an existing stage with 2,000 ice cream buckets. And this is the photo by Cemal, who's an Aga Khan photographer, when we got shortlisted in 2019 for this project. The context is really important for us, but especially in terms of microlibraries, the neighborhood is everything. The neighborhood is everything. So there is a river where the settlement is there. It's a kampung settlement. And there is also a kind of intersection with the slightly middle class, and the plaza in between is where the microlibrary is built. And this is kind of socially very important in a developing country like Indonesia, where we have to somehow preserve harmony between different classes, but also to provide facility for the poor, because they do not have facilities. So we find out that there is an existing stage that is already the center of a lot of activities for the neighborhood. So we're not taking it away, but we are improving the stage. And this is the context where the people, the users, are usually living by the river. And this is the photo of that kampung, of the Bima. So initially, we wanted to use jerry cans. So we wanted to collect a lot of them and use them as facade materials, but there was no such availability then. So they would have to produce new jerry cans, which would be new energy, new plastic, new material. So we said, no, we're not going to use that. And our team found out that there is this very interesting material in Indonesia. These are ice cream buckets. So if you go to a wedding in Indonesia, there is always several ice cream buckets. So we did not finish all the ice cream by ourselves, but we managed to find people who collect them. So over a couple of months, we managed to collect around 2,000 of them. So some are pierced, some are left as a whole without being punctured. And this material is performing as like diffuse transmission. So for reading, we need a kind of light which is enhancing legibility. So it's not too much, but not too little. And part of the buckets we pierce with holes to allow cross ventilation. And the stage is in turn shaded and rain protected. Then it can still be used for the community in the neighborhood. By the way, we experiment further with a coder. And we want to put the mayor of Bandung's message into the library, which means books are the windows to the world, and each letter is a binary code, which we translate into the ice cream buckets opening and closed facade. So these are the interior shots of how the daylight looks like. And in the daytime, there is no need to turn on the lights. There is enough legibility and it's comfortable enough to read. And in the evening, it's the other way around. So when the light is turned on, it's like it's like, what do you call it? A lighthouse, a beacon, a lantern, I wanted to say, a lantern. And so this is a picture where the youth community was using it for their gathering, or sometimes they do it to do their university studies. So it is very important that this kind of facility is also hosting different health activities. So in Indonesia, baby clinics are not often there. So that day when we visited, they were weighing babies. So these are used every 2 weeks as a baby clinic health checkup. So they bring their babies. And so it's like really informal, but it is at the same time part of the formal healthcare system as well. So this is just one slide about the microlibrary Selasar, which happened to be in East Java. And the reason we show it is because it's in the poster of this lecture. But also, at the same time, this is the similar logic of diffuse transmission, which we exemplified in the previous project.
Yeah, that will play a role later in the sort of summary. So I'm going to show now microlibrary Varakayo. So yeah, we're very happy to design this project. So this is the first FSC certified timber building in Indonesia. And it's located at the river again. And the difference here is a little bit to the previous project, that it is located next to a main artery, traffic artery, and we have domestic tourists coming there and getting off. And we have a little bit of synergies with a food court and a cafe next to it. There's also a school and a hospital nearby. So this is much more public than the other one, and becomes a tourist destination or a destination within the city of Semarang. Yeah, it's nicely located, looking over one side towards the Kampung Pelangi, which is the rainbow village. And you see on the left side along the river, this is a nursery where you can buy plants. So this is a very well-maintained spot. And what we did in order to design it, so we got assigned, or our client is the owner of the factory, Kayu Lapis Indonesia, with the Arkatama Isvara Foundation. So instead of posing an idea of what we're going to do, we went into the factory and we had a look what materials do they have. And from these materials, we started to develop further. Because in the beginning, we talked about the material mix, and then we immediately said, like, yeah, listen, if we can do it in timber, then let's do it completely in timber. So that led to a bit of a bottom-up design approach, and we had, again, the typology of the house on stilts, where we have the upper volume for reading and the lower volume as a sort of flexible space, play space, as a semi-outdoor space. And now we remembered back our earlier education, and in this case you see the screen underneath, the Zollinger construction. This is a construction method of a reciprocal system where one board holds the other with two bolts. And we also thought it's quite interesting because we're not dealing here with a timber frame construction, but a post and beam construction, which is something, you know, very industrial. So the representation of this mechanical bolts and nuts into the facade, it makes absolute sense. And in a way, you see it is a spread reflection. So we built this screen relatively deep to enable cross ventilation, but then at the same time that the light is also slightly scattered, reflected into the interior. And just as a small detail, so what we also do with storytelling, so this Zollinger and the diamond shape remind a little bit to this scale pattern. And they have this local icon in Semarang, which is called Warak Nendok. And this is sort of a mix of different cultures. There's an Arab, Chinese, Islamic culture making this sort of goat dragon-like creature. And because of the scales, reminded us, so we call the library Varakayo, which means the wooden Varak. So I walk you shortly through the interior. I switched one. So you see with a net and a play space, very open, very breezy, very airy. And of course, if it is raining too much or light at certain moments comes too shallow in, then we can close these curtains. These curtains are actually hospital curtains, so they're blood splatter proof. So we just happen to find them in a nice beige color, which is matching the timber color itself. Underneath we have then the play space, also in relation to the net up there. So there's an interaction between playing underneath and up there. And this is also one of these design strategies we learned more and more to integrate play features into our spaces. So we had this in earlier public space projects, but because there was no football field or no stage present as in the Beamer previously, we thought we put that in. And in a way, it's a sort of a design strategy to get kids there because they know there's the play feature, so they want to come back. And then hopefully on the way, while they're playing, they will start reading a book. The stairs up, which can be used as a small theater. If you put the screen down, you can watch movies. And here the perspective or the photo from the cleaned up riverside. And what we also like to do is, of course, these are architectural photos and they are always very highly curated. You can see actually how it is used in an actual situation. So these are images we grabbed from Instagram during the pandemic, when there were only a certain amount of people allowed to go in, but they also use it as a backdrop. But you see it's a vibrant neighborhood thing. So to summarize this, houses on stilts, so what we try to do with our architecture is creating places, and of course this is due to the activities you can do, but at the same time seeing the facade or seeing the building itself when you lift it as a sort of buffer space where you have one function very clearly defined inside, but sort of the fringes or the perimeter of the facade or the space underneath became this sort of socio-climatic space, this space for unforeseen and this all this neighborhood interaction and activities. And with this, I give back to Daliana.
I'd like to continue with the next project, the Stasi Creative Center. It's basically still a continuation of the house on stilts typology. So it's constructed for 3 years, got stopped during COVID, and it is recently up and running. So it looks like that. This is the west of Java, by the way. Tasikmalaya is a city over there, and this is situated in a kind of sports complex. So it's the only space that is still possible to build a cultural center, creative center. So in the context of developing countries, but especially Indonesia, where there is a lack of public transport, parking is still deemed necessary. There is no other choice but to let parking be. And at that moment, we were given the site. It was a parking site, by the way. So it was not an empty lot. It was already a parking spot, which we were asked to keep the parking. So we kind of put the functions above, and that's why the house is on stilt typology, and bring the function of the auditorium and the exhibition hall and the workshop up there. So the bottom is the parking, and then coming up the stairs, the semi-outdoor exhibition and the fully enclosed exhibition and the auditorium. So this program we got from the community in Tasik, which they asked specifically what they need and what they do not need in this project. So there's kind of like interaction possible within a short amount of time. And the facade that we are using here, basically it's a specular transmission. In a way, there is a layer of glass and with a secondary layer of skin of a woven material, which is reducing the amount of sunlight. So the density is also different based on the program behind it, but also it is lighter on some parts. And it is important for us to rethink the tropical cultural space in Indonesia, which will lead to another project also on the slides today, that there needs a lot of balconies, a lot of semi-outdoor spaces. And the fact that in a small town of Tasik, if you build something of a novelty, people are afraid to approach because they thought maybe they have to pay for ticket price. So kind of like stairs where they can just enter and flow freely and experience the space, or use it for shade during the rain when they happen to be there, is already serving them as a kind of public space in itself. So this is the experience of going up the stairs, using the stairs also as a semi-informal space. semi-outdoor space on the first floor, where you immediately can see on your left side the auditorium, and on the right side the exhibition hall, which is semi-outdoor. It has a corridor, so there is a layer of glass where, if you need it, you can fully enclose it and use air conditioning, because it can be really warm at times. But you can also open the glass surface and let the air flow and use it as a semi-outdoor space. And this is a zoom of the facade material, of the woven pattern. It is important that the woven pattern is kind of represented, as Tasikmalaya is famous for its woven craftsmanship. So this is the view from the inside of the exhibition hall, which can also be used for the workshop. And another thing, when you're practicing in Indonesia, are all these creative users. So this is a daydreaming contest where they're staring for hours, if not for the whole day, on the building. And it's the official annual daydreaming contest of this year. So they did that. I don't know who's the winner. So it's partly cosplay, partly being looked at, being photographed, but also how long you can stare, basically. And we have a word called bengong. That means basically it's not daydreaming. It's like you have nothing else to do but there is a kind of meditative element to it as well. So it's basically staring into the nothingness.
So far we were dealing with this enclosed, almost enclosed volumes, or at least enclosed with a facade. But in terms of envelope design, we also have the roofs, and Southeast Asia is the architecture of the roof. So we have our personal take on these roofs, because on one hand, you of course need to provide shade, but on the other hand, it's a very large surface, and if you have a very deep program, you still want to get daylight inside. So this is Bojonegoro. That was Central Java, right? Or is it East already?
This is East of Java.
Okay, East Java. A traditional market, which we were asked to redesign, and several phases. And you see here, this is the actual market situation currently. So this is hardly recognizable as a traditional market, pasar tradicional. It has its problems of accessibility. You don't see any entrance, but also you see on the interior it is completely closed off. There is some lights here and then there's not enough cross ventilation. It's a problem for hygiene. There's vermin running around. So part of it is, of course, not only designing the roof, but also what is happening underneath. So we thought of making stalls which are actually completely open to the ceiling, just with a grate, so fumes can go out or heat can go out, and everything is ventilated away. And the project is in 4 phases. One is the grain market, the actual pasar tradicional, the parking roof, and a mushola. And we could realize so far the grain market and the parking roof. So what we did here is a model, I think it was scale 1:20, and we built this model in-house. And we handed this model, we never got it back, we handed it over to the contractor that they're able to build it, because the 3D files were not enough. And with the skin and the sort of slightly diffuse polycarbonate, we're dealing a little bit with spread reflection and spread transmission. And luckily, the site is stretching from east to west. So all these openings are facing north and south. So they're relatively minimal to just bring enough light in, but also the depth of the space is quite advantageous, because if you have the low sun angle, east and west, morning and afternoon, it is not penetrating the space so deep. But what is also interesting, again, because you see the market in the background. So the plan was actually you demolish the market step by step, and then bring the people from the market underneath the roof as a temporary function. That's the reason why the parking was built first. And then you start with these umbrellas, which I show you later, building up step by step. But also you see people are craving for, or kids craving for, these shaded spaces to escape the heat. And so it become actually sort of more like an informal football field without parking at the end. Just for the sake of completion, this is the grain market. And now for the actual market building, for the actual market roof, we had 2 inspirations, or no, not inspirations, references, design references. One is Pasar Johara in Semarang. This is a Dutch colonial market building. It's a very important piece of architecture by Thomas Karsten, and it is still standing, and by now it's renovated. If you have the chance, you should go there and see it. It looks entirely different, but what we like about this, it is displaying a sort of Indonesian reality, the interaction, and maybe also a little bit the messiness, what is happening underneath. But interestingly, with this inverted trough and the punctuated roof, it brings daylight in, and with these columns, also a certain order. So even if you stand down here, and you don't see what is going on, you can always orient yourself with the ceiling and with the roof where you need to go. Another design reference is from Felix Candela, the High Life Textile Factory in Mexico. And we found interesting, again, because of the daylight, but also because of the modularity of the umbrella. So in a way, we came up with our own umbrella. And the idea, as I already said earlier, was with the umbrella, which is anchored into the ground, we could build the whole market step by step rather than in one go. So we could allocate the market temporarily underneath the parking and then back and forth till the whole roof is built. But yeah, the umbrella, of course, has to, or for us, had to serve several issues. So one is getting daylight in. And of course, if you say like we have a glass facade on top, then you already have an issue usually with trapping the heat, becomes a glass house. But since it's cross-ventilated, it's not so much of an issue. And we have these lamellas underneath, which is partly reflecting the light out again. So we have a specular transmission and a spread reflection where we get enough daylight in. But the reason why we have a glass facade on top and not an opaque facade, and thinking about a different strategy, was that we also are able to collect rainwater, because water is always an issue. You need to capture the water because you need a lot of water for cleaning out a pasar tradicional with all the vegetable and the fish and the chicken and everything which is used there. So we wanted to use the rainwater storage that they can clean out the spaces in the evenings after the usage. And then, of course, cross ventilation and a staggered system of umbrellas that also the heat, if you go deeper into the space, can escape vertically. So for designing these umbrellas, here you see a shading study, because for us it was important to figure out, in a way, how dense do we need these lamellas? Because there is a mixture between the more loose they are, the more daylight can penetrate, and maybe too much, and the form will be less legible. But the denser we go, then you have the problem that at a certain moment you also increase the cost. So it's basically a mixture between cost, daylighting, and appearance that they still appear volumetric. And as a final result, we have here this model, and you see how it sort of slowly stacks up, goes higher in the center, and also changes the volumetry of these individual umbrellas. Again, it's a sort of a wayfinding thing. So if you're standing inside and you see the larger and the thicker umbrellas, so you realize you're more in the center. And if you look and you see like the umbrellas thinning out, this is more towards the edge. And here, yeah, a shot from the interior, from the model. And you see we wanted to keep everything open to the top, that yeah, air and everything can escape. So this is our strategy for the horizontal surface, designing for the climate and the light. And now we go to our current and final project in the presentation.
So we have this Ruma Bua Indonesia Kaya. It's a cultural center, so it has a multi-purpose hall which can be used for concert and theater. And the client is a foundation who's known to be supporting artists, greenery, and sports actually in the country. We got this project through Instagram and a competition. So we were first invited. They looked at our social media, and we joined a closed competition, and we won the competition back in 2019. Where they had a different piece of land. So the sites have been changing, the design have been changing as well, but what we always want to aim is that what is the next tropical cultural center? How do we integrate greeneries, perimeter greens, elevated spaces, possibility for the semi-outdoor spaces to also exist around the formal concert hall. So this is what we're trying to do. And this is a shot of the model that we have at the office at the moment. The location is in Jakarta, and this is not a usual location to build a concert hall. So usually, like in New York, you do it near the 9/11 memorial site, a very prominent site. But this is a foundation-initiated cultural center. It's not from government, and they purchased this land, which is at a quite important intersection of the city, but not the obvious part, which is a good challenge for us to design when to be open, when not to be open, and we still want to have this constellation of how the multipurpose theater could have also the central cave-like space where people can gather before they go to the black box or the dance studio. So there is, on a kind of day-to-day basis, they will use this building for practice, but in the weekend they will use it for the multipurpose theater, and all the program can happen at the same time as well. So this is the top view of the model, showing the solar panel. So every time we say that we would like to use solar panel in the building, we refer to the SDE building, the renovation, that it is possible, and we're trying as much as possible to achieve that. It's also operational-wise cheaper for the foundation to run the electricity with the help of the solar panel. So this is the drop-off situation. There is a bomb check. It is really important, and then the car can go out or go to the parking. So this is the semi-outdoor lobby where everybody gathers before they go up to the main hall, to the tickets center. This is the kind of feeling that we want to make it like a living room, like an urban living room for those who come there. And if you go straight further at the back, there is a semi-outdoor cafe where it is possible to sit around and make it a kind of cozy space. So informality is important here. Although it's a concert hall, we don't want to make it too scary to kind of formalize that people are fearful to enter. So going straight further at the back, there is an amphitheater and a garden with water feature, and this can host several talks or dances or small shows experience before going to the main hall. So that's the layering of the program, and basically we connected with the SDG points, what we're doing here, because it's partly also educational, but it's also mostly cultural, and we want to make it a kind of exemplary project for Indonesia. So the main hall is basically this. It's the model you can open and has a section in it, and it's catering for 1,200 audience. So that's the view of the interior hall that we are working on right now. There is a lot of wood material, kind of stone material. So there are several layers that correspond to the need of the acoustic engineer, which is Nagata in Japan, and we are also, by the way, working together with Shimizu Corporation in Jakarta and with a lot of other engineers. So the facade is important because we would like to cool down the building. So the filtration of light is really important. And here in this side is the concert hall, basically. So it is fully solid, but then it kind of like make a gradient towards the kind of more opening, because behind is the lobby, and it is possible to have the glass surface and the secondary layer. So we try as much as possible to design it, also to make it culturally contextual in an Indonesian context. So each of the panel represent a pucuk rebung pattern. So it's basically a diamond-shaped pattern which is seen in many islands in Indonesia. So it's a kind of like unifying thing. It's not only Javanese or from Jakarta or from Sumatra, but it's like everywhere you can find So we're using the cultural pattern for the cultural building. So that's the sun path, basically. North is that way. So we are studying how the shading and the illumination should be. But also there is another layer that we study, that is the view analysis. It is really important that there are better views and worse views according to the users, that they would like to filter more out of the less beautiful views and more opening for the better view. So there is a combination of that, of course, with the solar radiation study. And we study that the solar radiation without the pucuk rebung facade, in comparison with the secondary skin facade, we call it the pucuk rebung facade, is 48% reduction of the solar radiation. So that can help saving, that helps cooling the building. So illumination is there all over the year, and there are some with more intensity and less intensity. And this is our response to the illumination that happens. So it's basically specular transmission. We have a glass, and the secondary layer, it basically cuts out the 48% of the sun. So we hope to achieve it as such that the facade responds to the cooling of the building, and therefore less air conditioning necessary, or just the optimum kind of hybrid cooling or air conditioning. So this is the facade during the daytime, and this is in the evening, where we are imagining that there could be like LED lights, but also the pattern is illuminated from the inside, so you could see the kind of pucuk rebung pattern glowing. So it takes a lot of engineering. We changed the facade 50 times, and we figured out different methods also to do that. So we're using basically light conventional frame, diagonal shape, and then basically panels, which are cladded over. So this is a really new picture from last Friday, where our team visited the workshop, and there is a one-to-one mock-up being made. So at the moment we're developing it. And today we got a go from the client that we could continue with the facade design, but as well as with the project as a whole. So look forward to our next development on this project. And thank you so much for being here and listening to us. Thank you.
I like the word socioclimatic. It's been a topic of interest for me as well for quite a while. The idea that somehow if we get the environmental condition right, that it facilitates a social dynamics. It's obviously not new. There have been many people who've tried this, but I do detect a shift in the thinking, and that I see in your work as well, from what you call the functional buffers at the beginning, where they're basically these semi-outdoor spaces, either under or adjacent to the building, probably because of the scale of the project. They're quite small projects. But as it kind of graduates to larger projects, the form of the building begins to create these semi-outdoor spaces. It kind of wraps, almost like a plastic way to create these tunnels and passageways for airflow and so on. And we see that also in the work of many other architects dating back from Ken Young in the 80s, who had balconies and semi-outdoor spaces stuck to the outside of the building. Now it gets much more internalized, and the form begins to do the work. I want to get your take on this. Like, is this an evolution process that you've gone through, or is it purely a consequence of scale? How do you construct the social?
Oh, this is a very interesting question. I mean, first of all, I think to clarify, what is not enough is just to provide a space which is nicely shaded. You have to construct the activities. And therefore, we mentioned that the play features become much more important. So it is really also thinking about what people can actually do without being too deterministic in a way. On one hand, let it happen, but on the other hand, add features which facilitates that. Then the other thing is also in the socio-climatic spaces, before I answer this architectural question, is having a good organization. So all these micro-libraries, they're staffed in a way by volunteers, right? And for instance, Warakayu in Semarang is by Arkatama Isfara Foundation, and they sort of coaching Harvey Center. And recently we spoke with an artist because he said like it could be even more. So it is always like you provide this space, and of course this goes beyond what the architect is usually doing, but you need to have the right people and the right organization, because otherwise it never becomes a place. So place only becomes, due to the opportunity that is comfortable, but due to people actually doing something with it, right? And now the question about, does it evolve into this sort of from houses on stilts into some form of the cave, let's say? Yes and no. So for instance, we had the first competition design, and I showed it to you back in the day, like really 2019, you probably don't remember. But we were always, we had similar stairs like we had in Tasikmalaya, right? And there was a lot of discussion, a lot of negotiation with the client, because in Singapore, I mean, thanks to a lot of outstanding architects, the semi-outdoor spaces are actually quite well known. And in Indonesia, they are not. So in Indonesia, we are always dealing with a mall typology, right? You go, you have to drop, so first you have to bomb check, because it's more of a dangerous place, maybe, or people feel it. You have to bomb check, and then you come to the glass facade, and then you immediately enter the air-conditioned realm, right? And we always wanted to do away with this, but this was really when we redesigned the project, I think 4 or 5 times. There was an evolution happening together with the client, because the client in the meanwhile also visited places like Sota, right? And they start to experience how this is and how it can be that you have a semi-outdoor space rather than you're completely enclosed in this shopping mall typology. And so yes, in a way it was not so much for us, we always wanted to do something like this, but more for the client, to get the client on our side, because they first need to see and experience it, because renderings and drawings and our imagination is not enough until they feel it and see it.
But it's also shifting the perspective on air conditioning, that you can have comfort without air conditioning. Is that right? I mean, there is this kind of normative idea that to get comfort, you have to have a certain set of ambient conditions, but that the design of the space, whether it's the quality of that space or the introduction of greenery or water, these compensate, or they create a different kind of comfort, shall we say. So the whole theory of comfort shifts away from this kind of very universal fixed condition to something that's more adaptive.
Yes, exactly. I mean, previously comfort is related to temperature, and or that's the perception of it, and it's still the case now, and it's really sad, because every time someone comes into, a Singaporean or Indonesian comes into the room, you set the AC to 16 degrees, which is totally ridiculous. It is too cold. And a lot of places in Jakarta, you have to wear a sweater or a thick jacket just to survive in that room, because it's basically too cold. So this level of degree of comfort has been like, the perception of it has been quite, needs a revision. So now looking at a lot of examples in Singapore, some in Indonesia as well, the whole concept of comfort with the airflow and with the greenery, with the water feature, that it cools down, but it does not necessarily brings you the winter. I think it's important, because that's actually what traditional architecture has been all about. I mean, there has been no air conditioning in the past. The floor could be used as a method of ventilation. All the openings, the big roof that shades the vegetation, etc. So it's just bringing back the common sense of what a comfortable environment is, and if possible, all of SHAU spaces could also be the interstitial spaces, or these buffer space that you mentioned in the beginning. But sometimes we really need enclosed space, such as this auditorium or the concert hall. It needs a kind of acoustically a controllable environment. So in that case, we can't experiment everywhere, but we try to experiment in the spaces where there are lobbies or kind of more flexible and informal use of space, that where things can leak, where the air does not have to be enclosed in a kind of glass box.
Now, you mentioned SDE4, and I think one of the few things that I'd like to think we achieved with SDE4 is that we made ceiling fans look sexy again. There was a time where, you know, they were out of fashion and everybody was like, you know, it's my grandfather's generation having ceiling fans, but now they're cool again. And I suspect in a place like Indonesia, technological options perhaps harder to sell. I don't know, speculating.
No, but this was always right from the beginning to have especially the micro libraries as little installation as possible. So electric light for the evenings and that's it basically, some electricity outlets.
But the micro library is almost domestic by scale. I'm talking about, say, your cultural center, to have an operable facade there. Would that have found a receptive client?
Or would that have been your dream? Or would you say no, absolutely not?
You mean having a kinetic facade which could react to this? Of course, I mean, that's a very interesting design task. I would love to do it, right? But that was never in question in the first place. Because then we would have to refer back to louvers, technical system, which is quite well known, you know, louvers down, louvers up, rotating. And you know how this works usually. If there is no central, you know, system which is sensing and actuating and processing this and just manual, then you know you end up with these things completely open all the time. But since it was never a question in the first place, because also like a budgetary question and a maintenance question and a technical question, actually I'm personally quite fine with having a fixed facade which is maybe shoving up off the peaks and provides sort of an average good solution, you know, rather than a specifically optimized solution, you know, which is then again more difficult to realize.
But to have a budgetless facade is part of my dream. So yes, I agree with that. That would be very interesting, if possible.
Anyone else? Yes, Greg.
Yeah, I thought that was very inspirational, the micro libraries. How many of them have you made so far?
7.
7, okay.
6 existing.
Yeah, okay. And I love the idea of going and see what waste material is around. Can we use this in a good way? And I always found, I mean, the biggest barrier to common sense design is often human perception, like Nirmal mentioned the ceiling fans, oh, that's old-fashioned. There's a bit of pushback. So did you find any pushback when you go and say, okay, we need these ice cream containers, they're going to be your new facade, and they're like, but that's a waste material. Did you get any, I mean, you do it beautifully, but was there any pushback from using this?
Not at all. I think we could imagine that maybe with the canisters more so, because this is sort of attributed to oil and gasoline and something smelly, right? Even though it is maybe orange juice which was in, but ice cream buckets, it's like everybody loves ice cream, you know, it's just like ice cream bucket is fantastic.
But also the scale of it and the publicness of the project, it's not a personal project where a client says, I don't want to have my room, my bedroom filled with ice cream buckets. We don't offer that. But it's a kind of neighborhood public building in a certain scale that we can experiment enough, but not yet regulated by the tough, complete fire retardant, fireproof, 100% building, which in that case we cannot apply to some of the public buildings that we design. So there is a degree of that experimentation that we like, and I think it's how we sell it with the waste product that we're upcycling, and this is completely beneficial, and then this is unique, etc. It's kind of like, because we don't have clients for the micro libraries, we only have partners and funders, so it's kind of easier to push things.
Just out of curiosity, how are they doing now, the buckets? Are they still up?
The buckets are still up.
The weathering?
Yeah, but we UV coated them. We cleaned them several times. That is, of course, that's another maintenance issue. So even though we have the buckets tilted, right, And if you have the full bucket with the bottoms outside, we drilled small holes if water comes in that it can run off. And the other ones with the big opening, it anyway can run off. But yeah, that is of course always an issue a little bit with a public building or no client. So who is then responsible? So we send sometimes Go Clean and clean up the buckets. But I mean, GoCheck in Indonesia has a lot of more services than here in Singapore. Go Glam, you can make your hair, Go Clean and stuff like this. So, but this is not a GoCheck ad here, but.
So when asked about the durability of such experimental material, I compare it with the paint. You anyway have to repaint your building every 5 years. So you also can exchange some materials. You can exchange some materials of the facade as you exchange the paint. So that is in a way. So we'll check it in 2 years how it is going to be. Then we'll let you know.
One bucket is $1 Singapore. So it's
one bucket is 1 Singapore.
So it's cheaper than painting.
Maybe Southeast Asia context, I think in Europe we do a lot on timber buildings, and obviously Berlage, you had the client who was actually a timber producer, so you didn't have to convince them to build in timber.
Yes.
But I think in Southeast Asia it's often perceived as a material for the lower class. It's not really considered a durable material. So I wonder what was the feedback after you build it from other Indonesian clients, whether they still have this perception of timber as a non-durable product, or your project actually helped to help to shift the mindset there.
Yeah. We had some other timber projects after, as you know, and so it is a very interesting possibility and opportunity. But however, price-wise, it is not that competitive. So I think this is what happens a lot in Indonesia: is first asking for the money, and then second for the other thing, right? And I don't see any problem with timber as long as you protect it and construct correctly. Water runs off, no rainwater gets trapped into any cavities and starts rotting. So it's a part of the architectural design which you have to deal with. And I think with Berlage we could demonstrate that it actually is working well. So yes, we still hope that we can, make more timber buildings. It would be fantastic.
Thank you, Daliana, Florian.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for
Thank
staying
you.
to the end.
Thank
you guys. Thanks so much.